Well, welcome back to another episode of Immigration Nation. This episode is one that you're definitely not going to want to miss. I have invited just a fantastic guest to talk about an area that really needs to be discussed. And as you can see from the title, it's all about supports and help for immigrant women who are fleeing violence or are suffering in any way from just really, really tough situations. And my guest today is going to share some great insight on the things that are available and the supports available to help people in these situations. So welcome to Immigration Nation. And okay, well, let's slide over here. And I want to welcome Kamaljit. It's great to have you. How are things for you? How are things out in British Columbia? I think that's where you're at, aren't you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark. I'm in BC in South Surrey, and it's we are undergoing a heat wave apparently this weekend, and we're pretty wimpy when it comes
Yeah,
to weather here. But no, we're doing well. Can't complain.
that's good. I know everything that I've been listening on the news lately is these dangers of these major heat waves that are coming through. And I can imagine, for us here in Canada, we're not too accustomed to major heat waves. It's usually the other side of the barometer that we're concerned about and it being too cold. But yeah, it's going to be interesting over the next couple of days just to see how hot it really gets. I remember about a week. Well, let's see, when was that? That was probably about 2 years ago. I remember the temperature got up to 43 degrees here
Oh
in
gosh.
Lethbridge, where I am, and I had decided to ride my bike to work that morning. And so when I rode home, it was probably in the afternoon, early afternoon. I got on my bike. Actually, no, it was 6 p.m. I was riding home, and it was still 41 degrees,
Oh
and
wow.
it was so strange. We're not accustomed to that kind of heat. So usually when I'm coasting down the steep hill down to the river valley that separates where my office was and where I lived, there'd be a nice cool breeze, and the faster you went, the cooler it got. But it
Mm.
was just like I was in an oven and the blower was on blowing hotter air at me,
Oh
and it
yeah.
was crazy. And I crossed under the main highway, this tunnel, and I stood and sat in the tunnel, looked at the temperature on my phone and was wondering, wow. And then I posted it, I remember, on one of my social channels, and then someone who was happened to be in Dubai posted the temperature in their vehicle, which was, I think it was over 50 or something. It was close
Oh
to 60
gosh.
degrees. So I was like, okay, well, there you go. I'm not going to complain about the heat here. So
That's pretty brave though to bike in that heat.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And maybe you could just start off by telling the viewers a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Again, thanks for having me. I have been practicing now for 31 years. I am a lawyer, practice in North Delta in BC. When I started out, it was a bit of a mixed bag doing, I'd say almost a general practitioner lawyer. I was, and then, but my real passion was immigration law. And I would say in the last almost 19 years, a lot of focus on immigration, and in particular, those that are the most vulnerable, such as women, immigrant women that are fleeing violence. That's sort of become a main focus of mine to see that there's improvements and law and policy are working in a way to help these women stay safe.
That's great. And so this particular area, how long have you focused in on this area? I know you've been involved with it, advocating and just helping to make things better for a number of years, but how long have you kind of been focusing in particular on this particular area of immigration?
So I would say that the prime focus came around 2009. I was retained as a supervising lawyer on a 3-year project with the BC Law Foundation. And that was with EVA BC. It's a big anti-violence organization in BC, Mosaic, and Vancouver Multicultural Society. And so with all these organizations, our project was looking at immigrant women in particular and refugees that are fleeing violence, and a real focus on what hurdles do they face when they are fleeing violence. We all know that any woman, when she's in a intimate partner violence situation, the different paths she has to navigate to get out of that
Yeah.
to safety is pretty tough. You know it's actually unimaginable what they go through. And then you add on this layer of you're an immigrant woman and or refugee. So our project was focused at, well, let's take a look at what additional hurdles that these women do face. So we conducted focus groups throughout BC with frontline workers that are actually dealing with these women. And some common themes started to emerge, such as those women that were out of status or had precarious status. And I'll just explain why would someone be out of status and what does precarious status mean. So out of status could be a typical scenario that we were hearing as a woman came in on visitor's visa and entered into a relationship with a Canadian or a PR, and that relationship turned abusive. But somewhere along the lines, they were, in this relationship, they were told that they would be sponsored into Canada. And so they didn't maintain their visitor status, thinking that they would have some status because their partner had indicated they would be getting it for them. So they lost their status. Or either they didn't have the money to continue to extend their status and lost their status. So there's a number of ways that these women can end up being out of status. And when I say precarious status, it's women who have status, but they're kind of tied to this relationship because the partner is saying, I'm going to sponsor you, but if you report the abuse, I'm going to take the sponsorship away. And so they're on like fragile ground with their status. So that was a common theme that emerged through the focus group, is that there's this group of women that are quite afraid to leave the abusive relationship because of their status or non-status, and this threat that their spousal application may be withdrawn. And Mark, you would know from practicing immigration law that spousal applications can be withdrawn at any time up until before a decision is made. So a lot of power is held by the sponsor. So that was a big thing that came out. These women were very concerned about leaving the abusive relationship, and rightly so, because some of the other feedback we got was that women who did call the police, so an out-of-status woman calls the police for help, they were reported to CBSA, and removal started against that woman.
Yeah.
And if that woman had children and she was removed, guess who the children would end up being with?
Yep, the abusive partner. Yeah.
Yeah, some real concern. So that's where it originated from. So the focus was this three-year project we did, part of which involved then talking to policymakers and trying to tell them we need to make some changes. We need to get some mechanism in place so that these women can get status, or an expedited process is what I was really advocating for. So that journey from after 2011, when we completed that project, every year we were going at it, trying to talk to policy people to get those changes in effect. So it's been a long road, but there's been some good news that I can share. There has been some positive changes and steps. But your question was, when did it start? So I would say about 2009, and it's been ongoing.
Wonderful. It's interesting. I look at the similarities that exist in your traditional foreign worker situation, right? To a large extent, we also see individuals on a far less scale. And this is just one comment I thought I'd pull up for you to see that there are some people that are definitely interested in this topic. And you can see Ferry here said he's excited about the title of the video. So I know there's an interest in this.
That's good to know, because I thought it would be a bit too heavy for a Friday. But
no.
Thanks.
This is gonna be great. And when I think about like the context of foreign workers, how often abusive employers are telling them, if you complain, I am your only ticket to Canada, and I will get you deported. Right. And so, even in that scenario where there's a tremendous imbalance, I can only imagine, like a power imbalance. I can only imagine how, like, to the 10th power exponentially, that power imbalance exists when it's an intimate partner. And, when there's physical violence, it's not just, I'm going to make you work 5 extra hours today and I'm not going to pay you. Like, this is a person's life and safety, there's security that's at stake here. So, we've talked briefly about some of the types of situations that people can find them in that kind of fall within this realm that we're discussing. But, so you've done some work now. So what legal options are available for women who find themselves in these situations?
So it'll be helpful to give you sort of a pre-July 2019, I think that was the month, and post. So pre-2019, the options were, if they were out of status, to apply for a temporary resident permit. And that, we all know, took anywhere from 6 months, 9 months, 12 months.
Yeah.
Right. So it takes a long time. So that was one option to get them some status. And if they applied and got a TRP is the acronym for it, for 6 months at least, then they could also apply for a work permit. So that would give them the ability to temporarily stay in Canada and not worry about the removals process starting against them. Simultaneously, they would apply for what is called a humanitarian and compassionate application, what we call the H&C application. And traditionally, those would take up to about 2 years to process. So you can imagine these women, I mean, just let's put ourselves in their shoes for a minute. I need to leave this abusive relationship with my 2 young children. First thing is, where do I go? It's transition home. So you're leaving, even though it's an abusive environment, you're leaving some kind of roof and food on the table to an unknown. And shelters, we know, are over capacity as it is.
Yeah.
So these women are under a tremendous amount of pressure, and they have to decide, am I going to take that step out and embark into the unknown where I may not get a TRP for 6 to 12 months. I may not get status for up to a couple of years. So that was pre-2019, around June, July. At that time, and again, that this is due to advocacy, and I don't just say it's due to me, there were roundtable discussions, right. There were people from many sectors contributing and giving input and saying that we need an expedited process. So that's in 2019, we got the expedited TRP in place and an expedited H&C for individuals fleeing violence. So what that means is they can now apply for a TRP if they are victims of family violence, and that TRP is going to be fast-tracked. How do they fast-track it? And this is where I guess I get a little bit of personal satisfaction. My own little personal contribution was the coding to allow this fast-tracking to take place. So these files are coded FV, so family violence. So you put those initials on the file, simple as that, and they will get pulled out for fast-tracking. And Mark, just a bit of background on that. Why I was pushing for coding was, and you may know this, for example, in BC anyways, when you were doing the PNP class, so you wanted to have a worker in the country really quickly, you would put a green sticker on the envelope.
Yes.
And the officer would know, okay, so this is an urgent file, and we need to pull this out and process it right away. So my argument was always, I'm not asking you to reinvent the wheel. Put a different color sticker on these files so that you can fast track them. So they said, well, Kamaljit, other than a sticker, what kind of coding would you suggest? Mm-hmm. So I'd actually suggested EFV. So they took the shortened version, the FV of it. Right. So that now allows the TRP to be pulled out really quickly. And it's supposed to be a matter of months within which then they get that status. Likewise, the H&C. So when I do these cases, I will apply for both simultaneously. So a lot of work that goes into both applications. So I get out both the expedited TRP and the expedited H&C. I code them. And my first one, which I had done, I think we had sent the application off in December. By February, we got first stage approval.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so that's the options that are available right now for women that are out of status. We're still working on tweaking it though, Mark, because there's some unintentional consequences that we're seeing happen. So with the expedited TRP, the woman can apply without having to pay fees for this TRP. She can simultaneously apply for an open work permit without having to pay any fees as well. And so then she'll get her TRP. But what we're hearing from colleagues in the profession is that women that have status, so for example, they're on visitor visa, they don't have that ability to get that open work permit, right? So they're on visitor visa, unless they go through that LMIA route. Yes. So they want to escape a violent situation and support themselves, what we're finding or hearing is that even if they're kind of letting themselves fall out of
Fall out of
status.
status. Yeah.
Yeah, and if they're in that window of restoring status, they're kind of letting that happen, which is not a good. We don't want to see that happen.
No,
So
no.
we're having ongoing discussions, recent discussions as of a few weeks ago with policy people to see if we can refine that, because the intention was not. I guess the intention was
Yeah.
to ensure that women that were out of status were not removed. That was the
Right.
primary goal.
Yeah.
But we didn't want to see other women who needed to get on their feet likewise face barriers, right?
Well, yeah, like have to I feel like they have to worsen their situation before it can get better.
Yeah,
To the concept of feeling like, well, I'm in status now, it doesn't change the situation I'm in.
no,
But the only way I can access the ability to support my family and free myself from this situation is through that work permit. But if the only way that I can get it is to let myself fall out of status and beyond restoration or whatever's required, well, it's unnecessary delays, then maybe they would feel like they needed to stay in the relationship even longer, to reach the stage where they could then extricate themselves. And
yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, it's like what kind of numbers are we talking about, Kamaljit? Does the government ever talk about how many people are accessing these? And this may be, it's just, I just was thinking about this, but do they have any idea how many people? Well, they can obviously go back and look at the statistics and see how many are applying for them. But what kind of numbers are we? I hope it's not large, but what kind of numbers are we looking at?
I mean, I did reach out to the policy people. I think since it was implemented, and I'm not sure the end date, so that was implemented around June, July 2019. And I'm not sure when they gave me their stats. It might have been mid 2020. There was at least 100 applications
Wow.
that had gone through. Um, and it's a new process, so some people may
Right.
not be aware of
Well,
it.
I'm assuming that there's probably 10 times at that stage, 10 times the number of people that could have been eligible for that, but just were not aware of it, right?
No,
It's
absolutely.
one thing to find you, Kamaljit, for these individuals to have the good fortune of finding you. But many of them, they're in positions where they just don't even know the resources that are available. In fact, this intimate partner, the perpetrator of the violence, does everything they can to close them out from accessing anyone that might help, to block them off. And
Yeah,
so
no, exactly. And when they're immigrant women, they may not speak the language. They
the
may be
language.
isolated.
Hmm.
So you got all these other layers that makes it harder for them to understand what their options are or know that there are options existing for them, for
Yeah.
sure.
So what are the criteria? Like what does someone have to establish or prove? We're still in the situation of a paper-based application. It's not like they have a counter, a front counter that they can come up to and say, I am the subject of abuse, help me. This is a paper-based application. So what are some of the things that they need to include for these expedited applications?
So for the expedited TRP, the abuse has to have occurred in Canada and by either a Canadian citizen or permanent resident in a intimate partner relationship. So that's the key criteria, and that these women are dependent on this relationship to have their permanent stay in Canada. So those, I would say, are the two key criteria that you have to meet. If these women have children, those children are also eligible, if they're not Canadian, eligible for that expedited TRP to come within that rubric, because they would have witnessed abuse as well. So that's the key and main ones, and that, like we've been talking about, that they be out of status is what the policy says.
Says.
Um, Although interestingly enough, I presented across Canada to transition home workers and operators, and I actually heard from, it might have been someone in Alberta, who said they were actually successful in getting the expedited TRP for someone with visitor status. So I took that back to the policy people and saying, obviously the officers would like to make this work.
Yes.
So let's either we make the policy clear that it will allow for women in status as well, we'll expand it, or I mean, if the aim of the woman is that she needs to work, let's allow for that coding to be put on an open work permit,
Yeah.
so we can expedite it that way. So currently, the way the policy is framed, though, it is supposed to be out of status women. So that those are sort of the key. And in terms of abuse, I'm pretty, pleased with, I think, and has been years of advocacy with immigration policy people, that abuse is not just physical,
Right.
abuse is not just psychological. Abuse takes many shapes and forms, from holding someone's passport, from watching their texts and their phone calls, and controlling the money that they get and receive and who they communicate with. There's just so many ways that abuse can take form and take shape. Power and control, is
Yeah, it has many forms.
yeah, many forms. So I'm pleased to say that in these applications you can be quite. You don't have to worry if you don't have that typical scenario of physical abuse, police report, what I call that nice, neat, tidy
Yeah.
package of evidence. Many of mine don't have that. And so we rely a lot on the transition home support workers, counselors to help build the narrative of what's happened to
Okay.
this
And that's
individual.
what I was going to ask. I was going to say, well, how do you prove this?
Yeah.
In this paper, type application where you can't give, viva voce evidence, you can't just tell your story in that same way.
Yeah.
What other ways can you prove that you're in this situation?
Yeah. So it has to be done quite, um, with that trauma informed lens. You have to proceed quite delicately. I find that number of times I'll have to sort of put the pause button on when I see these women, because I'm not a psychologist. I will hear and listen to them if they want to open up and get a sense of what's happened to them. But for that deeper dive where they're supported, I would rather that they be connected with a professional, a
Yes.
psychologist who can support them. And then I will get the report from the psychologist and put together the details of what's happened, how the many ways that this individual has suffered abuse. It's a tough thing to go through, and oftentimes I'll be doing it piecemeal. If the person does want to do it through me, it'll be piecemeal, a
Yeah.
small appointment here, another one here, and with support workers, so that I'm not re-traumatizing the person.
Right. Yeah. I can only imagine how complex it is, how delicate, how sensitive it is. So I guess one of the questions I have is, obviously women are primarily the individuals that suffer most from this, but is it only for women, or are there other examples where other individuals could make these claims?
No, it's not just for women. It's open to everyone who is experiencing violence in an interpersonal relationship. My When I say she, it comes again from years of advocacy for women. And I'll
Yes.
just share with you a few statistics of why my focus has kind of been women. So in 2018, police statistics, and these are Government of Canada statistics, showed about, I'm just reading some notes here, almost close to 100,000 people in Canada experienced intimate partner violence. That was 2018. 79% of those involved women. And then um, for intimate partner violence homicides, from 2008 to 2018, there were 945 homicides. 8 out of 10 of the victims were female.
Yeah.
And then finally, for sexual assaults, the 2018 stats show that being sexually assaulted, you're at 30 times higher risk of being sexually assaulted if you're a woman in the ages of 15 to 24. And let's add on to that, if you're an Indigenous woman, 3 times higher.
Huh.
So that's why when I usually present or I advocate, it is from the lens of a woman. But by all means, I'm not saying that men or others do not experience violence. And these applications and these legal options are available to all those that are experiencing violence.
Excellent. So myself, I have not had many opportunities. I have had some, but I have not had many opportunities to really, um, work within this vulnerable group. And so I know we've got a lot of lawyers that watch Immigration Nation, and we're freely sharing what we know. So how do you prepare for a client when they, maybe in advance that someone's referring someone to you? Often it may just be a consult that they book, and they've somehow been able to find you. But how do you prepare, to be able to deal with situations like this?
That's a good question. So a lot of my clients come from legal aid. So they will tell me that, give me a sort of an idea that this is a woman, she's in a transition house. So I'll kind of have a heads up. And then when I meet the woman, it is like I've said already, it's oftentimes a protracted piecemeal process. And I really need to give her space to share with me what she needs to share, but she has to be comfortable. And if I get any indication that um, there's a lot more to the story, but she's not able to do that, what I'm calling deep dive with me, that's when I will encourage and support the individual to get counseling and get support and continue to have that support, not just throughout filling the applications, which I would say take me up to about 2 months to do properly, getting the information. And if there is police involved, getting information about what the charges are, what the next processes are there. But again, if we don't have the physical violence, putting together letters from frontline workers, advocacy, uh, frontline advocates, and get information from them and affidavits from them to help build the story. But it is a patient process. And I think it's only in recent years where I learned about vicarious trauma. And I didn't realize how they do impact you as a lawyer, the stories that you're hearing. And so I am taking time for acknowledging that in myself as well, because some of these stories are very difficult to hear.
Yeah.
And so I may pause deliberately because I need to have time to absorb what's been said to me. So
Well,
it's not just preparing the client, it's also making sure I'm prepared as a lawyer.
yes. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Like I said, my exposure's been more on the side of vulnerable workers who are in exploitive situations where, it's not just that they haven't been paid fairly, but they haven't been given breaks, or they've been required to work, crazy hours with no days off. And but rarely in those situations is there physical violence, but there's no less emotional abuse and just this the power imbalance, such that I guess even economic security, right, is in the hands of the perpetrator if they're trying to send money home to their family, and they know that if they don't keep working, that then their family is going to be suffering in their home country. So when you talk about these things, I look at it through the limited lens of what I experience. And I do a lot of work with these individuals myself. But I can only imagine what it takes for someone in that situation to come forward, right? To actually have the courage. And so I don't know if you can speak to that just the makeup and what it takes for these women to come forward and be willing to say, okay, I need to get myself out of this situation. And I may come from a country where I can't trust any of the officials, the government or otherwise. And so you have that layer added on as well, where they have to come forward and trust people that are in authority, that they're actually going to help them, where they've come from maybe cultures where that would never be the case.
Yeah, so for sure. But I just wanted to acknowledge the foreign worker work that you do. And it's unfortunate to say this, but there is a lot of young women that are being exploited. They're sexually assaulted as well. At least I know in BC, I've heard many stories of that. So it's those are tough stories to hear, and definitely any of these individuals, whether it's through the foreign worker context, and we know that they have that option of the TRP for workers that have been abused. Any of these individuals coming forward, they are indeed very courageous to do so. Um, I used to think, here I am, I'm the lawyer, I'm the advocate, I'm the one really doing the tough job here, not realizing. I think it's really, there was a case I did, it wasn't to do with out of status, it was a refugee woman. And it really just impressed upon me how brave and resilient these women are. So this woman has allowed me to share some parts of her story, which was, she was brutally attacked in her home country. And she went through a refugee process where she was denied. And she had come to me to do an H&C application. I was not involved in that refugee process. And I looked at the file and And I was puzzled that there was just 2 lines about her narrative in the basis of claim about what happened to her. And basically, I was attacked on this day, and that was it. And the reasons of the board member were very basic. That, oh, there's another country you can go to, so you can go there. No one had a psychologist report. I was a bit dumbfounded what happened. So I went through the process, and it took me a long time, Mark, to get this woman to go see a psychologist. Got a psychologist report, got her case reopened, and it was set up in a trauma-sensitive way where I was beside her, support worker was beside her. We had a female board member, and after the hearing, she was granted a positive decision. And this woman, aside from the trauma she underwent in her country, when she came here, she was also arrested by CBSA because she was removable after her refused refugee hearing. And she was supposed to bring documents, which she said she forgot, and they didn't believe her, and so she was arrested. And she just had a huge breakdown then. And at the hearing, at the conclusion of the hearing where she was successful, the board member asked her, "Do you have anything to say?" And she goes, I've been through a lot. And I remember when CBSA arrested me and I was told to stop playing the victim. And she goes, there's some truth to that. I'm here today and I've been able to share my story and tell you what's happened to me. I am no longer a victim. I am a victor. Mm-hmm. And that was just amazing to see after everything this young, she was only 24, and brutal stuff that had happened to her. For her to come out and say, I'm a victor. And likewise, the other women that I see who I thought here I am the lawyer, I'm doing some great work, nothing compared to what they are doing and the steps they are taking to get out of a violent relationship. The courage it takes to do that, knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty, there's no guarantees. It's amazing. And it's I think their resilience that keeps me going, that if they can do this, and I gotta be able to be there for them and advocate the best I can.
Yeah. There's no doubt that it takes a lot out of you as a representative to continually be, just really laser focused and not feel overwhelmed by this. And I can imagine, each of these individuals going through this themselves. And I think personally, well, what would have happened to these women if Kamaljit was not there? What would be, and they're brave, absolutely they're brave. But I want to give a big shout out to you and all lawyers like you. You're not in this for the money, right? This is what I want to emphasize. And there's this perception that lawyers are driven by the legal fees we charge, and that's why we do what we do, because it's our job. Well, there is an unbelievable pattern of, when I trace back how people got into immigration law in the beginning, and I'll tell you, it sure wasn't to line pockets with money. It was designed to make a difference in the world, and not just that, but a difference for the one. And the satisfaction we get knowing that whatever help we were able to provide that individual makes a real difference in their lives. And I think of all of these women that have gone through these horrible circumstances, whether it's in the context of a refugee claim, whether it's in the context of just trying to extricate themselves from a horrible situation that they're in through no fault of their own. I just think how many of them, how many people are not getting the help they need because they're not aware of this. They don't know that there are people like Kamaljit and at Lehal Law Office that is able to help them. So in the description, if you know of anybody that is struggling with these things and you know that they're desperate and they need help, there is help out there. And you can always click on the link in the description below to connect with Kamaljit and her law firm. But there is help out there. Now I want to shift just to a couple questions. And if you have a question that you'd like to ask Kamaljit, please post it in the comments. We have a few that we'll get to. We're talking today, obviously, about the situation that vulnerable women find themselves in, often abuse and just terrible situations, and the options that and possibilities that are actually available to them. But if you have any questions, go ahead and post them. Let me pull up just a couple questions here. So this one is from Todd. He says, if a woman suffers violence after becoming a permanent resident and the husband divorces her, can the woman sponsor another partner before completion of 5 years of being sponsored as an exception? Now, this is a little bit out there. It's not entirely in the realm, and I'm not sure if you have an answer to that question or not. But I thought I would pull it up. I've got my own thoughts on it, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I don't think there's
Actually, I
any
guess
kind of
this
an
person's
exception.
talking about that 5 year sort of ban if you come into the country under a sponsorship.
Yeah,
It's a good question.
yeah,
I mean, I think they would, when you tick off those boxes about whether you've been sponsored in and that you'd be ineligible there, but you can always make H&C submissions in that spousal application is what I would do, saying that this was the context, and even though I'm ineligible, I'd like my application to be continued to be processed on humanitarian grounds. Um, and I've done that in other cases, not to do with violence, but where there are some really compelling circumstances where I want the file to proceed knowing that they're not eligible
yeah,
on humanitarian grounds.
yeah. And that's the thing to realize, that there are mechanisms built into the Immigration Act that allow for an officer to use discretion, to allow for possibilities to exist, to to apply for permanent residence yourself, or to sponsor in contexts where maybe the eligibility requirements would otherwise prohibit you. But you definitely want to seek legal advice. You definitely do. Now, Kamaljit, I'm just going to highlight this. So just to show you that this is making a difference. So Ugochi here says, can I have your email address, please? I do have someone. Well, I'm going to direct you to the link in the description below, Ugochi, where you can reach out to Kamaljit through her firm. And if you do have someone that needs help, so please, yeah, go ahead and do that. All right. So Igor is actually, he's from my firm. So he works in my firm here. He says, and this is a practical question. He says, so I'm wondering if an abuser holds the passport or any other vital documents of the abused person, how is this approached in practice? You'd need those to file an application, would you not? So how do you do that if you don't, if you don't otherwise have those critical documents? Do you have any thoughts on that, Kamaljit? If someone literally has to flee their home and they, in a at night on, in desperation, and they have no ability to go back and get those documents if they have them, are there mechanisms to help with that?
I'm thinking either it would be, contacting the police and saying your documents have been wrongfully withheld, and with the police maybe going back with a support worker to get them. If the person claims they don't have them, which could happen, that I don't know what this woman's talking about, then it's reporting them lost and applying again for those documents is what probably would be the next steps. And also adding in like I had mentioned before in the application, that this person has withheld my passport, or they're denying that they have it, and that's another mechanism of abuse and control, power and control. So making sure that those points are made in the application as well.
That makes a lot
And
of
hopefully
sense.
a family lawyer would also be able to assist if there's any protection orders that are needed. So oftentimes I will be working in conjunction with family lawyers when there's an actual, assets an issue, as well as child support is needed. So that is happening. So I'll be getting affidavits from the family lawyer to include in the application too, or court orders if there's protection orders.
Excellent. Igor says that he bets there's a lot of victims who are reluctant to come forward, report
Well,
the
absolutely.
abuse, and even contact the lawyer if they're out of status. Some just don't know that they can fix their status.
Yeah, and that's what our focus groups showed when we did them in 2009 to 2011. That many of these women were reluctant to come out because they've been told, some of it I would say is myths, when the person says they can take away your status if they do have status. For example, you can't just take away someone's visitor status, but they're afraid of some of these myths being out there, and they don't come out. But the reality is that some of them are not myths. So we have seen these women be reported to CBSA. We had
Yes.
stories of people back east, that was when we were doing the project, where they heard of CBSA going into transition homes to find the women. So there's a real reason for these people to be afraid. And right now, I mean, we've seen before the pandemic, this was an epidemic, violence against women. In the pandemic, we've seen that spike, at least in BC, reported to be 300%. We were at capacity before the pandemic. And after that, organizations have been looking for hotels, anywhere else they can put these women. So when it's so unclear and so unknown, yes, so it's unfortunately easier for women to endure the abuse than go into the unknown.
Wow. So one of the questions I have, as our colleagues across the country really watch this video, is there a good way to kind of get yourself up to speed with this area as an immigration lawyer? Like, where would be the best places to go? Do they contact you if they say, look, I'd actually like to be on the list for, to provide support? Obviously you have relationships built with the various support networks in your community, but I'm assuming there are similar things in other communities across the country. And so if a lawyer wanted to get involved and just find out how they can contribute to this, what is the best way that you could think of for them to kind of get involved if they hadn't previously, those relationships weren't there?
If they want to get involved, they may want to contact their local community nonprofit organizations that help these women that have transition homes. Is a good place to find out, are there any women that have status issues that need help. The legal aid societies of their region also probably will receive referrals. And I've had actually junior lawyers approach me and ask me for guidance, and legal aid here in BC does offer coverage for senior lawyers, although I haven't submitted any bill for that, but to allow for my mentoring time of students, or not students, young lawyers just coming and learning this area, or even more senior lawyers wanting to learn it. I'm happy to help.
Awesome.
But legal aid, transition homes, community organizations, support organizations are a good place to look into to see if there are individuals needing help.
Excellent. Thank you. So Todd he's expressing appreciation. He says, thanks so much for pulling up my question, and thank you for answering, Kamaljit. Love you guys. See, there's lots of love around here, Kamaljit. Okay, let's see what else we have here. We've got a couple other questions. Okay, here's a tricky one. So what if they're not willing to seek help? And especially, if they're outside Canada, well, there's not much, it's tough. Because many of them don't believe anyone can help their situation. So we're talking about people that are in Canada. When things are happening outside, there's not a lot that we can do. But when individuals are in Canada, one of the things that I wanted to point out was for the 16, 17 years that I've been practicing, I've had lots of people that have come to me talking about abusive situations with their employers. And only once last year did I finally have someone who was willing to come forward. It didn't matter how much I pled with them to just tell their story. I can make it work. And this was through the old TRP and, work permit options, that we can fix this. They just, the mechanisms are just simply not there to really give a lot of, at least prior to, like you said, June 2019, to give people comfort to know that if they do come forward, there is really a pathway forward. And I know CBSA is coming around. They're starting to, become much more educated with respect to this.
And on that note, before I forget, so a key, I think, positive thing that's come out of these expedited policy changes is that CBSA is instructed, if there is an expedited FVTRP being made, removals is to be put on hold. So that's fantastic, because that was one of the big hurdle that prevented women from wanting to come out and report the abuse. So that's I was really happy to know that happened. And also one other thing, sorry to interrupt, Mark, before I forget, is that typically when we have these agency applications, we get first stage approval. And in that first stage approval, it says, well, you still have to pass medical, you still have to pass security, and make sure you don't go on social assistance. So that was something of a concern to me, because even though it's nice to have these TRPs with the open work permit available to women, psychologically, many women aren't ready to just jump out of an abusive relationship and start working. And they may need that support. And to get from a transition home to second stage housing, they need to be on some kind of social government
Assistance.
assistance.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm happy to report earlier this year, after raising that with the policy people, immigration officers now have the ability to waive that requirement. And so they're doing so in these applications. So just wanted to share that
Wonderful.
bit of, any little bit of good news I can share.
Yes, that's fantastic. That's really, really good. Wow, this is, I've learned so much about this. And like I said, the parallels, obviously, anytime there's some kind of a power imbalance, and I'll be honest, I really don't like the foreign worker program. I've lived as a business immigration lawyer for so many years. And as the national chair of the Canadian Bar Association, I represent the views of, collectively of our members across the country. But personally, in my ideal world, there would be facilitative measures to have people come in as permanent residents, and employers can support them. And if employers are crappy employers who don't treat their workers right, they don't deserve to keep them. And it irritates me when I have employers that I know are abusive that are getting a competitive advantage in the market with their businesses, putting other good ones out of business because they're not paying fair wages. It just, oh, it's so frustrating. And,
Yeah, sure.
so I would love to see a world, where you'd have the ability, even like in this pathway that you've worked to create for these women, in a way is kind of like that. It's saying, look, no longer are you going to be held ransom by an abusive partner, just to have security here in Canada as a permanent resident. But there is a pathway for you, and there is a way out, and you don't have to stay with this situation. I remember that conditional PR that we
Yes,
used to
yes.
have. Hey, can
Yeah.
you imagine that? Where, even after you become a permanent resident, you can't escape that
Yeah,
situation.
that was a 2-year requirement to remain in the relationship. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
advocating on that, saying that you can't do that to women. So they created an exception. There was a bulletin they created allowing individuals who were experiencing violence during that time to prove that they were, and they didn't have to meet the 2 years. But that was a lot of advocacy by many people as well.
Yes. Yeah, it sure was. Well, we've got a God bless you here, Kamaljit, for
Thank you.
helping women. And please understand, I'm here as the host, but Kamaljit is the one who's been doing the work. And I want to thank you so very, very much for taking the time to join us. I don't know if you have any kind of parting comments, last thoughts, or things that we haven't had a chance to discuss that you wanted to share, or advice you wanted to provide, or direction to us other immigration lawyers out here who maybe are less experienced with this area. I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up.
I think we've covered a lot. I actually just wanted to thank you, Mark, for giving a platform for this. It's like I said, it's a heavy topic, and it's Friday, and so it's not a fun, bubbly topic, but it's an important one. It's one that I'm happy to always give my knowledge on, share my knowledge on, and I really appreciate you giving the platform for this.
Great. Well, it was a pleasure having you, and thank you so much. And thank you for all of those that were watching live, that were posting questions. I know this was a little bit different. You guys are used to my live Q&As and my more open-ended, no holds barred, ask whatever you want approach. But we really wanted to focus this one in on this very delicate, sensitive, but really important area. So thank you so much, Kamaljit. And if you would like to get help, or you know someone that needs some help in this area, just in the description, you can click on the link and it will take you to Kamaljit's website where you can connect with her. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kamaljit. Have a
Thank you.
great weekend.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Bye bye.
Take care.